Hello. Cheating by my pregnant wife, the secret I uncovered and the fight for my son. My name's Mark, and I've been married to Claire for 5 years. We met back in college and had one of those whirlwind romances. She's this amazing woman, brilliant, charming, with this magnetic energy that draws people in. We've always been the type of couple others look up to. At least, that's how it seemed. It started a few months ago. Claire's always been busy with work. Being a lawyer means long hours and plenty of stress, but I've always admired that about her. We've had our rhythm, and I didn't think twice about her late nights or the business trips she occasionally had to take. But recently, it feels like she's here less. Not physically, she's still around, but emotionally, it's like she's drifting. Then there's the way she's been spending more time out, finding reasons to be away from home. It's nothing too dramatic, things like grabbing coffee with friends or taking these long walks alone to clear her head. She says the pregnancy is making her anxious, and I get that. I want to believe her. But sometimes, when she heads out for yet another walk, I can't shake the feeling that she's not just escaping the house, but something more, or someone. But what really got me was last weekend. Claire's always loved shopping, but now it's become an almost weekly thing. She goes out for hours, claiming she's looking for baby stuff or just getting some air. Normally, she'd come back excited, eager to show me whatever she'd picked out, but now. She walks in quietly, her bags tucked away before I even see them. I ask how the trip went, and she gives me these vague answers, "Oh, it was fine," before disappearing into another room. I'm trying not to jump to conclusions, but the small things add up. And when I see her looking tired, eyes a little distant, I can't help but wonder what's really going on. So, things have been a little weird lately, but I've been trying to let it go, focus on the fact that Claire's pregnant and, life's about to change in a big way. She's been working from home ever since she decided that the stress of her job wasn't good for the baby. I was all for it. I mean, it made sense, right? Her health comes first, and working from home seemed like the perfect solution. Yesterday, I came home early from work, something I don't do often. It was one of those rare days where everything wrapped up early, and I thought, why not surprise her? Maybe we could spend some time together, relax, and just enjoy a quiet evening. I had this idea of picking up her favorite tea on the way home, one of those small gestures that used to mean a lot to us before life got so hectic. When I walked through the door, though, the last thing I expected was to see Claire sitting at the kitchen table with a man. He wasn't anyone I recognized, just a guy in his late 30s, casually sipping tea like it was the most normal thing in the world. The sight stopped me in my tracks. They were sitting close, talking in hushed tones, but the moment I stepped in, the conversation seemed to freeze. Claire looked up, her face completely neutral, maybe a little too calm. "Oh, hey," she said, smiling, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But there was this tension in the air that I couldn't ignore. My eyes flicked to the guy, and he just gave me this polite nod, but stayed quiet. "Who's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, though 100 thoughts were racing through my head. Claire didn't miss a beat. "This is Dr. Andrews," she said, gesturing to him casually, like it explained everything. "I wasn't feeling too great today, just, some pregnancy stuff, so I called him. I didn't want to worry you." I looked at her, trying to read her face. There was no sign that she had been feeling bad. In fact, she looked perfectly fine, maybe even more put together than usual. Not pale, not tired, nothing that screamed I need a doctor immediately. And honestly, that didn't sit right with me. She wasn't the type to call a doctor over at home for something minor, especially without mentioning it to me first. I nodded slowly, but my gut was telling me something else. "You didn't call your regular doctor?" I asked, glancing at the man again, who hadn't said a word. "No, I just didn't want to make a fuss," she said with a smile that felt too easy. "Dr. Andrews is an old friend, from my law school days. He was nearby, so I figured why not. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something about the way she was brushing it off, the way this guy just sat there, calm as ever, sipping his tea like he was a little too comfortable in my house, it just didn't sit right. There was no sign she had been feeling bad, no evidence that she had needed a doctor at all. We exchanged a few more pleasantries before he left, and the whole thing felt off. After he was gone, I asked Claire again if she was feeling better, but she just shrugged it off with a quick, "Yeah, I'm fine now." And that was it. But the whole scene stuck with me. Why would she call a doctor without telling me? And if she really wasn't feeling well, why did she look perfectly fine the whole time? Something wasn't adding up. After that strange visit from the doctor, things went back to normal, or at least, that's what I tried to convince myself. Claire didn't mention him again, and I didn't press the issue. Maybe I was overthinking things. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering about that afternoon, about why she looked so calm, about why she called him of all people, and why there had been no sign that she'd felt unwell at all. Then, last weekend, something else happened. We were spending a quiet Saturday at home. Claire was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, while I decided to tackle some house chores. I'm not the best at keeping up with cleaning, but lately, I'd been trying to help out more, especially with Claire being pregnant and all. So, I took it upon myself to clean up our bedroom. You know, dusting, vacuuming, the whole deal. As I was tidying up, I noticed something odd. I was cleaning out the drawer by the bed when I saw it, a used condom package tucked beneath some papers. I froze for a second, staring at it. My mind went blank, and my heart pounded in my chest. I mean, Claire and I hadn't used condoms in, well, I couldn't even remember the last time. With the pregnancy and everything, we hadn't needed to. My first instinct was to jump to the worst conclusion. But I stopped myself. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was old, something left over from before Claire got pregnant, and it had somehow slipped through the cracks when we were cleaning up. That happens, right? Or maybe it was mine, and I'd forgotten to throw it out right away. I mean, people forget things. I could have missed it during one of our more hectic days. I stood there, staring at the package, trying to convince myself it wasn't what I thought it was. I wasn't the kind of guy to overreact. But, my gut wouldn't let it go. With everything that had been happening, the weirdness with Claire, the doctor visit, something didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to cause a scene without knowing the facts. I needed to be sure, and as much as it pained me to admit, I couldn't shake the suspicion that maybe, just maybe, something was going on behind my back. So, I decided to play it safe. I ordered a small camera online, one of those tiny ones that you can hide without it being too obvious. I know, it sounds extreme, but I felt like I needed to know what was really happening. The doubt was eating away at me, and I wasn't about to accuse Claire of anything without proof. If there was nothing, then I'd know I was just being paranoid. But if something was happening. I set up the camera in our bedroom, hidden in the corner where it could record everything, but it wasn't in plain sight. Claire didn't notice a thing. I felt guilty doing it, like I was betraying her trust, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore that nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Now, I just had to wait. Wait to see if my paranoia was misplaced or if the doubts in my head were about to be confirmed. Either way, I knew that this was a turning point. Whatever the camera caught, I'd have my answer. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I was ready for what I might find. A week had passed, and the tension in me hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown. Every day I saw Claire, acting as if nothing had changed, I felt that gnawing doubt getting stronger. I knew I had to face the truth, whatever it was. So, one evening, when Claire had gone to bed, I sat down in the office, took out the memory card from the hidden camera, and prepared myself for what I might find. I loaded the footage onto my laptop, my hands trembling. The first couple of days seemed completely normal. Claire would move about the bedroom, folding clothes, lying down, scrolling through her phone. Nothing out of the ordinary. I skimmed through the clips quickly, almost hoping to find nothing, convincing myself that maybe I'd been wrong after all. But then, on the third day, I noticed something different. The camera didn't catch the front door, but it didn't have to. The subtle clues told me everything. The first thing I noticed was Claire. She walked into the bedroom, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there when we were together. She smoothed her hair in the mirror, adjusting her clothes. Then, just a few minutes later, Jake, our neighbor, appeared in the frame, casually stepping into our bedroom like he belonged there. I felt my stomach drop. Jake. It wasn't the doctor from last week, not some stranger. It was him. I paused the video, my hands shaking. How long had this been going on? I kept watching, unable to look away. Claire barely said a word to him. They moved around the room as if they'd done this 100 times before. And then, with no hesitation, they climbed into our bed. I skipped ahead, hoping it was some kind of mistake, hoping that somehow, this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But as the week unfolded, it became painfully clear that this wasn't a one-time thing. Each day, right after I left for work, Jake would arrive at our home. Sometimes it would be in the late morning, other times in the afternoon. Always after I was gone. He never stayed long, just long enough. It was the same routine, day after day. Claire never seemed nervous or concerned. She knew my schedule well enough to be confident that I wouldn't catch them. They didn't speak much, there was no need. The silence between them was almost casual, like this had become their normal. And then they would have sex, in our bed. I sat there, staring at the screen, watching the woman I loved betray me with a man I considered nothing more than a neighbor. Each new clip felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was planned. Repeated. Routine. I couldn't believe it. Every single day, while I was at work, Claire had been inviting him into our home. Into our bedroom. I thought about all those moments when I'd come home, tired from work, and she'd smile at me like everything was fine. I thought about the nights when she'd been distant, brushing off my attempts to be close, saying she was too tired, that the pregnancy was exhausting her. I felt sick. I closed the laptop, unable to watch any more. The proof was right there in front of me, but I still couldn't wrap my head around it. My wife, pregnant with our child, had been sleeping with another man. Not once. Not twice. But every day. How long had this been going on? How many times had I walked out the door, oblivious, while they were already making plans to meet as soon as I was gone? I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious all at once. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the blank screen after I closed the laptop. My mind was racing, but my body felt numb. It was like everything had collapsed around me, and the weight of it all was pressing down so hard I could barely breathe. Suddenly, something inside me snapped. The fury, the betrayal, it all surged up, overwhelming everything else. I stood up and grabbed the chair, hurling it across the room. It crashed into the desk, knocking over books, papers, everything. I didn't stop. I slammed my fists against the walls, tore down the shelves. The framed photos we had taken during better times fell to the ground, glass shattering, pieces of our past littered across the floor. The rage blinded me, and I just kept going, ripping apart the room until it was a wreck of broken furniture and destroyed memories. It wasn't enough. Nothing would be enough to make this pain go away. Eventually, I stopped, panting, my hands shaking. The room was trashed, completely unrecognizable, but the emptiness inside me still lingered. I picked up the memory card from the camera, clutching it in my fist, feeling its sharp edges dig into my palm as I stood there, in the wreckage of the room, wondering how everything could have gone so wrong. It was late. I didn't care. Claire was asleep in the bedroom, our bedroom, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I stormed down the hallway, still shaking with anger, and slammed open the bedroom door. Claire stirred, blinking groggily as the sound woke her. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. "Mark," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "What's going on?" "It's the middle of the night." I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, glaring at her, feeling the betrayal burn through me like wildfire. She looked confused, her brow furrowing as she tried to make sense of what was happening. "What the hell is this, Claire?" I yelled, throwing the memory card onto the bed, the small object landing between us like a grenade. My voice was so loud, it echoed in the room, making her flinch. "What is it?" She stared at the card, her eyes wide now, clearly awake. For a moment, she didn't say anything. The silence was heavy, like the air itself had thickened. What are you talking about?" she stammered, her voice shaky, but there was something in her eyes, fear. I could barely contain myself. "You think I'm stupid?" I shouted, my hands trembling with rage. "You think I wouldn't find out? Every single day while I'm at work, you're with him." I spat the words out, the disgust in my voice cutting through the air. Claire's face went pale. She glanced down at the memory card, and I could see the realization hit her. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. It was as if she was searching for something to say, something to explain, but she knew. She knew there was no excuse that would fix this. "Mark, she started, but I cut her off, my voice trembling now with more than just anger. "Every single day, Claire. You invited him into our home. Our bed." I was pacing now, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. "I watched it. All of it. You, with Jake, every day, while I was out there working, thinking you were here, pregnant with our child, being faithful, being my wife." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they did nothing to calm me. She tried to reach out, her hand trembling. "Mark, please. Don't you dare touch me." I shouted, stepping back, my voice raw. "How long, Claire? How long have you been doing this?" She was sobbing now, but I didn't care. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her apologies. Nothing she said could undo the damage she'd done. "I trusted you," I said, my voice quieter now, but no less fierce. "I believed in you. And you've been lying to me. Every single day." Claire's sobs filled the room, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. Not anymore. Not after everything I'd seen. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of her betrayal. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the wreckage, of the room, of our marriage, of everything I thought we had. Morning came, but I hadn't slept a minute. I couldn't. My mind raced all night, playing the scenes from that video over and over again, Claire and Jake, every day, right under my nose. The anger had simmered into something colder, sharper, more focused. Claire stayed in the bedroom, I think. I didn't care where she was anymore. I didn't care what she thought. Today was about Jake. I didn't go to work. How could I? No, today was for something else. I waited. The house was eerily quiet. The kind of silence that feels thick, like it's waiting for something to happen. I sat in the living room, staring at the front door, my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Every minute that passed felt like a countdown to the moment I had been waiting for. Jake didn't know I was home. He had no idea what was coming. Claire didn't dare move or speak, knowing there was no excuse that could save her now. I had made it clear to her, no texts, no warnings, nothing. He would show up, expecting the usual. But today would be different. Finally, I heard footsteps on the porch. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation. I stood up slowly, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, walking to the door like a man heading into battle. I grabbed the handle and swung it open, revealing Jake standing there, his usual smug smile ready to greet my wife. His smile faltered the second he saw me. "Well, this is unexpected, huh?" I said, my voice low, barely holding back the rage boiling inside me. His eyes widened in shock, clearly not prepared to face me instead of Claire. Before he could respond, before he could even form an excuse or explanation, I swung. My fist connected with his face hard, sending him stumbling back off the porch. He barely had time to react, let alone defend himself. "You think you can just walk into my house?" I shouted, following him down the steps. My hands were trembling, but I didn't care. I wasn't holding back anymore. "You think you can sleep my wife and get away with it?" Jake held up his hands, trying to defend himself, his voice shaking. Mark, wait, it's not what you think." He was trying to speak, but I wasn't listening. I didn't want his pathetic excuses. I had seen everything. "You come into my house, into my bed, every day." I snarled, slamming him again. "You think I didn't see it? You think I don't know? A mistake." I growled, my grip tightening. "This wasn't some one-time thing, Jake. You did this every day. You destroyed everything." He tried to push me off, but I wasn't letting go. "I'm sorry," he gasped, his voice desperate now. "I didn't mean." The rage inside me had taken over completely. I didn't care about his apologies, about his reasons. All I cared about was making him feel at least a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. "You're sorry." I spat, my voice shaking with rage. "You're sorry after sneaking around with my pregnant wife for God knows how long. You ruined my life." I took a step back, my fists still clenched, breathing hard. I didn't care anymore. Not about him. Not about what happened next. I had said what I needed to say. The damage was done, and he knew it. "Get out of here," I said, my voice cold, my body still shaking. "Before I do something worse." Jake scrambled to his feet, barely able to stand, and stumbled away, not looking back. I stood there, watching him retreat like the coward he was. And when he was gone, I finally exhaled, the adrenaline leaving my body all at once, leaving me feeling more broken than ever. The front door creaked open behind me. Claire was standing there, her face pale, eyes wide, watching the aftermath unfold. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. It was over. For both of them. I stood there for a moment, watching Jake stagger off, bloodied and beaten. My heart was still pounding, the adrenaline slowly fading, but the anger stayed. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from fear or regret. No, it was from the sheer weight of everything I'd just learned, everything I had just seen. I turned back toward the house, feeling the rage simmer beneath my skin. The front door was slightly open, and I could see Claire standing in the hallway, her eyes wide and terrified. She had watched the whole thing unfold, but still said nothing. She just stood there, frozen, like she wasn't sure if I was going to come for her next. I walked inside, slamming the door behind me. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. Claire's lips quivered as she tried to form words, but I didn't care what she had to say anymore. Her tears, her excuses, none of it mattered now. I took a few slow steps toward her, my voice cold and calm, barely containing the fury inside. "What are you still doing here?" I asked, my tone sharp, biting. She blinked, stunned, like she didn't understand what I meant. I couldn't tell if it was fear or disbelief in her eyes, but either way, I wasn't interested in her reaction. "Why aren't you packing your things?" I snapped, louder now, making her flinch. "Come on. Pack your stuff and get lost. Go run after your lover." The words tasted bitter as they left my mouth, but they needed to be said. Claire stared at me, her tears finally spilling over, her hands trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself like she could shield herself from what was coming next. "Mark, please," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't, Mark, please, me," I shouted, taking a step closer, my anger boiling over again. "You think there's anything left to say? Anything that's going to make this better? You've been lying to me for months, no, probably years. Behind my back, while you were pregnant with our child, you were Sleep the neighbor. Every day. You made a fool out of me." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. She had no right to cry. Not after everything she had done. Not after betraying me, after destroying everything we had. I took a deep breath, trying to keep control of the rage still surging inside me. "Pack your things," I said slowly, the words dripping with venom. "And get out. You want him so bad. Fine. Go to him. But you're not staying here. Not another second." Claire stood there, shaking, her face pale, her hands hovering near her chest as if she could somehow stop the tidal wave of consequences crashing down on her. But there was no stopping it now. This was over. There was no coming back from this. "Mark, please, just listen to me," she begged, her voice breaking. "I didn't want this. I didn't mean for it to happen." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "You didn't want this? Are you kidding me? You didn't mean for it to happen?" I shook my head, disbelief and disgust flooding my veins. "You did this every single day, Claire. Don't stand there and pretend like you're some victim. You knew exactly what you were doing." She sobbed harder, but her tears meant nothing to me now. I wasn't moved by her breakdown, by her pleas. It was too late for that. It had been too late the moment she invited Jake into our bed. Without another word, I turned away from her, gesturing toward the stairs. "Get out of my sight. Start packing, Claire. I want you gone before the day's over." For a moment, she didn't move. She stood there, like she still couldn't believe this was happening. But then, slowly, she nodded, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Without another word, she turned and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our broken marriage. I stood there in the empty living room, the echoes of what had just happened still reverberating in the air. It didn't feel real, not yet. But one thing was clear, there was no going back. It was over. And now, she would finally be gone. Months passed, but the pain of what had happened never really faded. The house felt emptier without Claire, but at the same time, the quiet was a relief. It was as if the constant tension that had filled every corner of our home had finally lifted. I threw myself into work, into anything that could keep my mind off the chaos that had been my life. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing, the baby. I had tried to distance myself from the thought of him. It was too much to process at first. The betrayal, the lies, and then, to top it off, Claire being pregnant through it all. I didn't know what to feel. Was he mine? Was he Jake's? I didn't have the answers, and I wasn't sure if I could handle them. Then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Claire's sister, Megan. I hadn't spoken to her since everything went down, but when her name popped up on my phone, my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she had to say. I opened the message, and it was a picture of a newborn baby boy. He looked so small, swaddled in a hospital blanket, his little face scrunched up as if he were about to cry. And then I saw it, the unmistakable resemblance. He was a copy of me. Without a single DNA test, I knew. He was mine. Megan's message confirmed it. "Mark, I thought you should see this. You need to know that he's yours." I stared at the photo for what felt like hours, my emotions swirling in every direction. He was my son. Not Jake's. Mine. And that changed everything. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let Claire raise him. After everything she had done, lying, cheating, dragging me through hell, I wasn't about to let her raise my son, pretending to be the mother she clearly wasn't. He deserved better than that. And if she was willing to betray me in such a cold, calculated way, how could I trust her with our child? The decision was made. I was going to fight for custody, no matter what it took. The divorce proceedings had already started, but now, it had become about more than just splitting assets or going our separate ways. Now, it was about my son's future. I collected everything I could, every bit of evidence, every moment of her betrayal. The videos, the messages, the fact that she carried on with Jake right under my nose while pregnant with my child. I had it all. I hired a lawyer, one of the best, and we built a case that would prove Claire was unfit to raise him. Her actions had shown me exactly who she was, and I was determined to make sure the court saw it too. I couldn't allow her to raise my son with the kind of deceit and selfishness she had shown me. The trial began, and walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Claire was there, of course, looking as polished as ever, but I saw the cracks. She wasn't the same confident, put-together woman I had once known. The truth had caught up with her. We laid everything out, the affair, the video footage, the way she had deceived me for months. I didn't hold back. My lawyer made sure the court saw the full picture. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting my son from a mother who had proven time and time again that she was willing to put her own needs above everyone else's. Claire tried to defend herself, of course. She tried to play the victim, claiming that the affair was a mistake, that it had nothing to do with her ability to be a mother. But the evidence spoke louder than her words. The court saw the betrayal, the dishonesty, the reckless behavior. And I could tell, it was clear they were beginning to see things my way. There were moments during the trial when I caught glimpses of that photo Megan had sent me, burned into my memory. My son, looking so much like me, so innocent in all of this. He didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I wasn't going to let him suffer for it. He deserved a stable, loving home. And I would make sure he had it. The trial stretched on, but I stayed focused. Every day was a battle, but I knew what I was fighting for. And I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. I would do whatever it took to make sure that I raised my son. The day the court handed down its decision was the day my life changed forever. I had been waiting for weeks, barely sleeping, my mind spinning with every possible outcome. I had prepared myself for the worst, bracing for the possibility that Claire might still have a chance to keep our son. But deep down, I had been holding on to the hope that the court would see the truth, what kind of person she had become and the danger she posed to our child's future. When the judge announced that the custody of our son was awarded to me, I felt like I could finally breathe. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. The relief, the overwhelming sense of justice, hit me all at once. I had won. I had fought for my son, and now, I had the chance to give him the life he deserved. I glanced across the courtroom at Claire, my now ex-wife. She sat there, stunned, her face pale and drawn. She looked nothing like the confident, sharp woman I had once known. The months of lies, the guilt, the exposure of her betrayal, it had all taken its toll on her. Her lawyer sat beside her, whispering something, but she didn't respond. She just stared down at the table, a hollow expression on her face. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything, how she had deceived me, how she had brought Jake into our lives, into our home, and into our bed. How she had carried on with her affair while pregnant with our child. No, I couldn't feel sorry for her. Not after all the damage she had done. As I walked out of the courtroom, holding my lawyer's hand firmly in a handshake, I knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. My son was still a newborn, but now, I had the opportunity to be the father he needed. I wasn't going to let him grow up in the shadow of his mother's mistakes. I was going to give him the love and stability he deserved. The weeks after the trial were tough, though. Even with the court's decision in my favor, there was a strange emptiness in my life. Claire's presence, despite all the pain she had caused, had been a constant for years. Now, she was just gone. And in her absence, I realized how much of myself I had lost in the process of trying to save a marriage that had been doomed long before I ever found out the truth. As for Claire, the fallout was brutal. Her reputation in our small community had taken a hit. People had heard about the trial, the affair, and the lies. I heard from mutual friends that she had moved in with her sister for a while, but even her family was struggling to support her. Claire wasn't the same woman anymore. She had lost everything: her home, her husband, and most importantly, her son. I didn't hear much from her after that. She reached out a few times through her lawyer, asking for visitation, but I wasn't ready to make that decision. Not yet. Maybe someday, when our son was older, I'd have to explain to him what had happened. But for now, I just wanted to focus on being the best father I could be. There were days when the guilt crept in, when I wondered if I had made the right choice, if taking him away from his mother would come back to haunt me. But then I'd look at my son, his little face a mirror of mine, and I knew I had done the right thing. He deserved a stable, loving environment. And I was determined to provide that for him. I stood over his crib one night, watching him sleep, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. In that moment, I realized something: I hadn't just fought to win custody. I had fought for him. For his future, for his happiness. And no matter what the cost had been, that victory meant everything. Claire's absence was the price we paid, but as I watched my son dream, I knew it was worth it. Life had settled into a new rhythm since the court decision. My son was growing, and each day I felt more secure in my decision to raise him without Claire. I was starting to believe that maybe the worst was behind me. But, as with all things tied to Claire, peace was short-lived. One morning, as I was walking past the front window, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. There she was, Claire, moving her things into Jake's house. The same neighbor she had been having an affair with. Boxes, bags, everything. It was like a scene from a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. After everything, she had the nerve to move in right next door. I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up, but I knew better than to let it take over. She could live her life however she wanted, but I wasn't about to let her proximity mess with the life I was building for my son. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay. Not here. Not with her living just a few feet away. I couldn't raise my son under her shadow, watching her build a life with the very man who had destroyed ours. So, I made a decision right then and there: I would move. I didn't care what it took. My son and I needed a fresh start, far away from this toxic situation. I started planning the move immediately. Called a real estate agent, looked into listings, anything to get us out of here. It felt good, like I was finally taking control of my life again, moving towards something better. A few days later, Claire must have caught wind of my plans. That afternoon, just as I was putting my son down for a nap, there was a loud knock on the door. I knew exactly who it was before I even opened it. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and there she stood, Claire. Her face was twisted in anger, her eyes flashing with fury. "Mark, what the hell are you doing?" she snapped. "You're planning to leave, just like that?" I didn't even let her finish. "It's none of your business," I said coldly, gripping the door tighter. "I'm doing what's best for our son. Something you should have thought about a long time ago." Her face turned red, her voice rising. "You can't just take him away. This is where he was born. You can't keep me from seeing him." I felt the old anger flare up, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You had your chance, Claire," I said, my voice steady. "You made your choices. Now I'm making mine. She tried to step forward, as if she could force her way in. Mark, we need to talk about this. But I wasn't going to let her manipulate me anymore. I took one last look at her, this woman who had caused so much pain, and slammed the door in her face. The sound echoed through the hallway, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of closure. I leaned against the door, listening to the silence on the other side. She might still be furious, still yelling, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to let her back into my life. Not now. Not ever. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back. The move was happening, and soon, my son and I would have the fresh start we deserved, far away from Claire, Jake, and everything they represented. The move happened quicker than I expected. Within a few weeks, the house was packed, the sale finalized, and my son and I were on our way to a new home, far from the life we had left behind. As we drove away from that neighborhood, away from Claire, from Jake, from all the memories that now felt like scars, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. Our new place was smaller, cozier, and tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew us, no one knew the story of what had happened. It was exactly what we needed, a fresh start. Life began to settle into a better rhythm. Mornings were filled with laughter as my son's little giggles echoed through the house. I'd wake up to his tiny feet kicking in his crib, and the worries of the past seemed to fade more and more each day. I threw myself into fatherhood, into work, and into creating a life that was ours, just me and him. Each day felt lighter than the last. There were no unexpected knocks at the door, no reminders of betrayal waiting just next door. Just the two of us, building something new, something pure. We found a new routine: walks in the park, bedtime stories, dinners where I'd try my hand at cooking and usually fail, but it didn't matter. We were happy. And I was healing. The bitterness that had once consumed me began to fade. I wasn't defined by what Claire had done anymore. I wasn't defined by the anger or the betrayal. I was simply a father, raising his son, giving him the best life I could. Every now and then, Claire would try to reach out, messages, a lawyer's letter here and there, but I kept my distance. She made her bed, and now she was lying in it. I knew someday I'd have to let her back into our son's life, but for now, I focused on what mattered most, giving him the love, stability, and happiness he deserved. Looking back, the pain and chaos of the past felt like a distant storm, one I had weathered, one that had passed. And standing on the other side of it, I realized I had come out stronger. Wiser. My son, growing every day, was my second chance. The reason I fought so hard. And as I watched him take his first steps in our new home, stumbling toward me with that big, innocent smile on his face, I knew we were going to be okay. Life was getting better. And this? This was our new beginning. Bye-bye.